What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Tribe of Runners podcast. I'm your host, Liz Myers, and today I have a very special guest that I actually got to meet in person out at the Monster, and that is Aaron Young. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Heck yeah. So just a little backstory on like how we met. Funny enough, I was at the Arizona Monster, super excited, and I just happened to look over and see this hat that had the intense fit, and I was like, oh my god, I literally just had Gabby on the podcast. So I had to go up and I was like, hey, do you know Gabby? And you're like, yeah, she does my nutrition. I'm like, so cool. So it was so cool to, link up that way. That's one thing like I really love about the ultra community. And you were super kind. Even though you were getting ready to run, you sat there and chatted with me for a second. And then afterwards, I was like, I have to have him on the podcast.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. And yeah, it was a pleasure to have a chat. It was something that coming over to the US that, so this is the second time I've been over to the US for a race, and everyone that I've met, not just in the races themselves, but everyone's been super friendly, super happy to have a chat, and so it's one of the main reasons why after the last time I came over to the US that I wanted to come back.
That's awesome. I love that. So what other races, before this did you come to the US for?
So I came over in 2023 for Big Dog's Backyard Ultra,
Very cool.
and that's the only, as an adult, that's the only time I've been to the US.
Okay, very cool, very cool. And then a question, since I obviously we know you did the Monster, and then you did Cocodona. So I was like, oh my gosh, we have to talk all things on these races. But uh what intrigued you to come over to the US to do a race over here? Anything specific, or were you just like, hey, this race looks awesome and I want to go after it?
So last year around about February, I did my first 200 miler,
Mhm.
and immediately after that, I was kind of like I heard about the Arizona Monster, and so my first 200 miler, like in some ways, it went really well. I won the race, but
Very
I
cool.
went out quite fast, and then the back half of the race didn't go to plan at all, and it was really hot conditions. And then but I really enjoyed having to just struggle through and try and like fight to the end. And so I finished the 200 and immediately signed up for another 200. But at the same time, I heard of the 300 and I was like, well, I wonder if I could do that. And um, you know, the like going from running backyard ultras to point races, it was just a completely different kettle of fish. So it was just this whole adventure aspect that really drew me to take on, and to want to take on these challenges like the Arizona Monster and then also Cocodona.
That's awesome. So what was your first 200, if you don't mind me asking?
So it was a 200 miler in Western Australia called Delirious West 200 miler.
Okay, very
So it's in the southwest of Western Australia. So it's well, the back half of the course is beautiful. It runs along some pretty spectacular coastline. It's so the ones that I've run over here didn't have the kind of big climbs that uh, like running like going up Mount Lemon or that first section of Cocodona, but there was some pretty stunning scenery, and it was probably a pretty good place for me to start. Before last year, my training or races, not many of them had much vert in them at all, so that was something I struggled with, particularly my first 200 miler, was just realizing how ill-equipped my quads were to deal with, uh, you know, all of that up and down.
I can imagine. And you mentioned previously, like you were really big into backyard ultras, which is awesome, and that's a whole different topic. So we won't get too much into that. But what really, before we kind of get going into the monster and Cocodona, what really got you interested in running, and how did that begin for you?
It was kind of an organic journey. So in 2016, I tore my ACL in my left knee, and then over the course of uh, eight or 9 months after my surgery. I put on a ton of weight. I was eating poorly. I was drinking, probably 4 or 5 nights a week. My mental health wasn't great. And then it's kind of been this organic journey over it took a couple of years before I actually started running, but through going to the gym and then cycling, and out of wanting to train for an Ironman with one of my best mates, I kind of started running, and then what started as like training for like a triathlon, I discovered backyard ultras, and then realized that these kind of events were something that I could maybe be good at. And I just kind of liked, even from the cycling, just going out and seeing how far I could go. I started cycling during COVID, in 2020, and I started out just, I'd go and ride maybe, for an hour, and then that would turn into 2 hours and 3 hours, and then by the end of the year, I was doing rides over the course of 36 hours that were like 600 kilometers or like 350 miles, and it just kind of grew quite quickly. And I just realized that I really liked going out and just seeing how far I could push myself, um, and with doing things like that, and kind of going from doing relatively small rides to those bigger ones quite quickly. There was a lot of learning pretty quickly about nutrition, and I made so many mistakes where I'd go out and ride. I'd start I think like the first time I rode maybe 200 kilometers. So what's that, about 120 miles?
Mm-hmm.
It was like a yo-yo. I'd go out and I'd ride really fast, and then I'd just bonk, and then I'd have to like literally sit there for an hour, or try and find somewhere to go and find some food, and then it was just this process of doing this over and over again. And I eventually got through the day, but it was one of those things where it was, that experience of like this complete seesaw of feeling good and then riding really well to just feeling like absolute rubbish.
Yeah. Oh gosh. And then you became addicted to it, and then eventually transferred over into running. And now, do you still do cycling, or are you strictly straight up running all the time? How's that changed?
I don't do a lot of cycling. I'm going to do like a big ride like that next weekend,
Very
with a
cool.
friend of mine, but I have not really done much training for it. So it's more a case of just, um, I still enjoy going out and doing that kind of stuff. And I will usually take a couple of weeks, or a month after a race, or after a couple of races like this, just to kind of do whatever I feel like. So often that means going and doing a few different things, like going on some long rides or some hikes with friends. So doing those kind of activities, I find really enjoyable. And so, yeah, I still ride a little bit, but not as much as I probably would like. With work and running, it kind of it's become a little bit difficult to fit all the riding in.
Yeah, I can imagine. Running is like a part-time job, and especially for 300, 200 plus miles races. So, but to go in kind of detail, so Arizona Monster was first year of 300s, first inaugural, first year or first race of ever with this race. And then you also were signed up for Cocodona 250. So this race was just, I think, literally just a day under a month apart, right around like a month apart. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure training was wildly different for that, which we'll kind of get into. But you finished the monster, and if I hopefully I have this information correct, right around 98 hours. 98 hours, 10 minutes, and 26 seconds. You were sixth overall. And how'd that feel for like your first 300-mile race?
That was that the Arizona Monster is definitely the toughest thing I've done ever in my
Oh,
life that I can
okay.
think of. And I think a lot of that was not necessarily due to the difficulty of the course, but I I struggled to get good sleep in the 2 weeks before it, and then flying over, uh, and yeah, it kind of compounded onto the like the third and fourth night. It just became really, really difficult to kind of keep moving forward.
Yeah, I can imagine. Sleep is very important. We'll get more into that, but we mentioned, Cocodona was a month later, and then you finished that in 80 hours, 8 minutes, and 3 seconds, which you were 10th male, 14th overall, which is amazing. Two races back to back. Amazing, amazing accomplishments for both of the races. And I believe, if
Thank
I
you.
remember correctly, I saw there was 11 of you guys that had done like both of these races, and you were the fastest of all of them, which is amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I think yes, that's correct.
Yes, very cool, very cool. And that's huge congratulations. Amazing, amazing accomplishment. But now the real question is like how did you train for all of that? What did things look like knowing you had such a big race to then go and do, another big race right after that? Did you change a lot in training and how did that kind of work out for you?
You mean in between the two races?
Nope, before. So we'll get to that in a second, but like going up until the monster comes up, knowing you had the monster coming up and then a month later going and doing the 250, how did the training beforehand look for you?
Um, so I could probably give you a bit of an idea of what a weekly, like for maybe the couple of months leading into it looked like. So to give you an idea, so Mondays would usually, and I'll try and convert things to miles because I know. Um, so like a Monday would normally be about like after work it would be maybe like 19 or 20 miles of just easy road running.
Okay.
Um, Tuesday morning before work. So I normally start work at around about 6:30. So getting up to run before work means probably usually around about a 3 a.m. start.
Mm.
Um, so it would probably look often. So Tuesday morning was like maybe 10 miles. There was a bunch of running drills and accelerations from a standing start, strides um, would be in there. Tuesday evening, I'd probably spend 2 hours at the gym,
Okay.
um, focus predominantly on strength. Wednesday's always my rest day. Thursdays was maybe 13 or 14 miles of like hills. So
Okay.
maybe like somewhere around 3,500 feet of vert would be
Okay.
the average amount of vert I'd get on a Thursday. Friday morning was intervals, so often that would be something like 5 sets of 5 minutes or 4 sets of 8 minutes or something along those, like around threshold
Mm.
um, kind of running. Then Friday evening, another couple of hours at the gym. Saturdays, I did, so Saturday morning would probably be another 20 miles, uh, and that would be kind of trails, but usually nothing like too steep in terms of hills.
Mm.
Saturday afternoon, I often went for a hike with my girlfriend. So we do what 10K. So what's that? About 6 miles of pretty steep hills, and often I would take a heavy pack. Like I'd fill it up with bolts and things like that. So it'd probably be
Mm.
like at least 50 pounds, and that was just to build strength in the legs for the hills. And then my big run of the week was it's usually around about 20 miles or so, and that would have at least 6,000 feet of vert in it every Sunday.
Very cool. I
So
love that.
like it
So,
works out to maybe 95 miles a week and maybe
yep,
I don't know 10,000 to 12,000 feet of vert is like the overall.
very cool. Now, how was training for the vert? Because you had mentioned before, like you never really had to worry about vert. So, when knowing that these races were going to have some good elevation gain to them, what was that like for you, transition wise? Was it a huge, like, oh, I definitely need to focus on this, and did you transition into training more like that?
So last year I would focus on I'd do 3 or 4 sessions with hills every week, and so a lot of my focus last year was about trying to get better on the hills and just getting the quads and um, so they were a bit more robust, and so that definitely worked last year. But I did find that spending so much time just running hills, uh, my speed dropped off a little bit. So that was why we introduced a little bit more of the kind of the flat, easy running, and a little bit more speed work, and the strides and accelerations and those kind of things, um, just to try and increase my running efficiency on those areas where where it's a little less steep, and where I could run a bit more during these races.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And it makes sense because at the end of the day, going after these distances, yes, they're long and some of them do have a good amount of vert in them, but you want to be fast. So it makes sense to incorporate that. When did you kind of dabble in work with your nutrition? So obviously, I know you have a nutrition coach and someone that helps you with nutrition. So when did you realize in training that you needed that and wanted that for yourself?
So I actually approached Gabby last year, so probably around March. So pretty much since I started running, I'd been having a bit of trouble with my iron, and so I was finding it really difficult, and I'd have to keep going back to the doctors and getting blood tests and iron infusions and those kind of things. So that was why I originally approached Gabby, just to see if she could maybe help me get a better handle on how I could, you know, actually improve that just through my diet. And
Mhm.
you know, that was one of the biggest changes, and it did help a lot with my energy during training. And then through talking with Gabby, I realized that all the races that I'd done previously, my nutrition had been a little bit hit and miss, and there was a lot of in races. There was a lot of times where I was like having to change my whole plan as I was going through the race, and some things weren't working, and so it became, I don't know, it became like probably an area where I knew that I could probably work on, and I'd had so when I started working with Gabby, and over the last 12 months, we've trialed a lot of different things. And so it's been, I guess, much more process driven, where Gabby gave me a lot of options to try. And so I've gone and tried a lot of them in training, and then we've kind of tested things throughout races, and we do a lot of reflection after races to try and work out what worked really well or how I can improve it. And the result is that, at both of these races, I really didn't have any gut issues at all. I was averaging between 90 and 100 grams of carbs an hour throughout both races. And so it's something now that I can pretty much rely on, that it's, as long as I kind of stick to the plan that we put together at the beginning of the race, that it's something I can kind of like take to the bank, that that's going to work well. So then it gives me a bit more brain space to focus on some of the other things that are happening during the race.
Yes, I love that. And I can only imagine, and I'm sure you've heard it as well, so many horror stories when it comes to GI issues and GI stress. And, it's one of the main things I think as runners, sometimes it gets put on the back burner, but at the end of the day, it's very, very important. So I love that you got everything figured out and things have been working and going very well for you. Because, like you said, it's one less thing to have to worry about and stress in the midst of a crazy race, especially one that you're going to do, two races a month apart. So that's amazing. So getting into the kind of deep dive of the races, when you got there for the 300, what were you feeling? Were you excited? Were you nervous? Were you just ready to go after it? What were you kind of feeling on the start line there?
Well, when I actually, so funnily enough, at the start line of the 300 miler, I was just relieved to get there. So the night before, I left the headlights on the car, and so um, we went out to open the car and to put all the gear in to drive to the race, and realized that the battery had gone dead. And then we realized also that someone had tried to break into it. So the key, we couldn't actually use the key to get into the car either. So we couldn't actually jump start it. And it was just like, I was really lucky. I was saved um, by Brian was a local, and he was running one of the aid stations in Tucson. I think it was Catalina. The first one that you come into as you get into Tucson, and so we put a message out on Facebook, and he responded and said, "Oh yeah, look, I'll come and I'll take you to the start line." So he pretty much saved my race from the get go.
Oh my gosh. That's insane. But that's amazing that the some guy could come out and help you, and that's again another reason why this ultra community is so amazing. But wow, what a way to start. So obviously you were probably very either whether you wanted to or be not, you had a lot going on mentally, like stressed out when you got there and like realized you're there and you're safe. Did you like calm yourself and get ready to go? Did everything work out good with that?
Yeah, everything. Once I got there, everything was fine. Um, and at that point, it was just kind of cool. Like there were so many people around that I'd kind of seen or follow on social media. So just going and saying hello to people like Andy, um, and like I was lining up right next to Joe on the start line. So it was kind of cool just to be there and be around people, and then to watch the pledge as well. That was
Mhm.
another cool thing that you watch that on YouTube videos. So that yeah, that was quite exciting at that point.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then I'm sure all the race jitters come and you know, all the normal, everything gets going. So let's kind of dive into this race. What I will break it up into each 100, you know, like 300 miles. How'd the first 100 go for you? Anything that like stuck out? Did you have a smooth sail? How'd the first 100 part of the 300 go for you?
In general, the first 100 went pretty smoothly. That first like evening with the sunset, as we were heading into what was it like, um, from to like Gila River, uh,
Mm-hmm.
like, and all the red rocks there. That was like absolutely stunning. So that was like a real treat for the first sunset. I did just before the sun went down. I managed to trip over a cactus, and so I got some like cactus thorns that went into my foot through my shoe, and like I took my shoe off and I thought I got them out. And it didn't feel quite right. And then I got to the next aid station, and there was still like a couple of like spines in there, and I
Oh,
realized, but after the race, I realized there was still like a couple that were like really deep in there, and like it took like a week to get them out. Like they were really deep into my toe. So like that was like my first experience with the desert. But otherwise, that first 100 went pretty smoothly. It was my first at all the other races that I'd done. I'd had crew, like had a couple of people come and crew for me. So there wasn't a lot of points where I had my mum come over from Australia with me, but there wasn't a lot of points where you could get crew access. So that was something that I took a lot more time than what I was expecting. So
mm,
I was probably not as prepared as what I could have been, and so that was probably something that I thought that I definitely could have improved on. However, the second 100 miles, particularly the climb up Mount Lemon, that was really cold up there. Um,
oh,
I By the time I got to the top and I sat down, I like there was the cold wind was just coming through the aid station, and then I went for like I tried to go for a little sleep up there, but it was too cold, so I didn't sleep. So I just got back up and I was going to try and keep moving, but when I went to like take the blankets off to put my pack on, I just started shaking uncontrollably. And
mm,
so eventually I kind of, after trying a couple of times to get my pack on, I went to the aid station people. I'm like, I can't like take the blankets off. Is there anything you guys can do to warm me up? So they took me inside the camp kitchen and gave me like a hot cup of cocoa, and then they actually brought the outside heater into the camp kitchen for me and like helped to
so-
warm me up. It took about a good half an hour or 45 minutes at that point just
oh,
to
wow.
get me warm enough. So that was something. And when that first happened, I was like, oh, am I gonna have to sit up here and wait for like 3 or 4 hours for the sun to come up before I'm actually going to be able to stand up and run again? Because but I was really lucky that everyone looked after me, so I felt pretty grateful. And then, but because I got cold, that descent down Mount Lemon, I think that's probably that's definitely one of the hardest points for me during the race. Just um, feeling a bit kind of a bit cold at the start, and yeah, that was a really difficult descent. Um, and then I guess after you get down off the mountain, you're onto some pretty flat terrain as you go into Tucson, and then along that footpath for about, I think it was about 50 k's that were on the footpath.
Mm-hmm.
So it certainly moved a bit quicker, but being on hard and flat concrete, it was a bit more painful, and that was I was lucky at the next aid station. I think at Rieto.
Yep.
Um, there was a lady there that was offering like massages, and that was like a godsend at that point.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so how was going up Mount Lemon? Because you'd mentioned like Bert was a little iffy for you, and not to say iffy, but you were not used to it. So when you got there and actually climbed up, aside from having to be cold up at the top of Mount Lemon, how was the climb up there for you?
Look, it was that was quite a steep climb. I think I did okay. Like there was a few people at the aid station before. Um, I think it was at Oracle. I think it was the aid station before you go up Mount Lemon, and there's a few
Mhm.
people that I left at around about the same time. And I kind of, when I got to the top, I was still kind of in kind of the same vicinity of the people that I was climbing with. So I felt that the climb was good because you had to work a little bit harder. It really helped with the colder temperatures.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So now let's get into the last back half of that race. How were you feeling body wise, mentally wise? This is where the nitty gritty comes in. So this is where the deep dive of the ultra comes in. How were you feeling?
But body wise, the my legs and like that, everything kind of held up relatively well. But that was where the sleep deprivation really kicked in. So I've had races where like you kind of, when you look at something, all of a sudden like a tree looks like a person or a face or an animal or something like that. But this, I was convinced running what was that section between um, I think it was between Oak Tree and Apache Springs, the third last section, and I was convinced that I was running. So I'd had a friend that I'd spent some time in the Philippines with, who'd been messaging me before the race and just saying good luck. And I'd kind of created this whole thing in my head, and I was convinced that I was running through like a town that I'd visited while I was in the Philippines, and like in a market, and there was a whole scenario, and I was kind of, I think I was drifting in and out of sleep. So,
Mm,
I was actually, I was, I had like some of my friends who would occasionally call me while I was out on course during the race, and I was describing people in like tuxedos that were out there, and I was like, there was all this kind of like, there was this complete scenario, and then I was telling them, I think there was a turn off a few k's from the aid station where you had to make a turn, and I was like, I don't want to miss the turn off, and I was telling them about, there was like this big mansion, I think that's a bit further up, and they have dogs, and I don't want to have to deal with dogs at this point because I'm a little bit tired, and like there was a whole array of things that I was talking about um, that I didn't remember until after the race. But yeah, that was I'd never experienced anything like that before.
wow. Well, that's crazy. Now, do you think um it was, well, obviously like because of the sleep, but do you think getting more sleep would have helped that? Or do you think
Oh,
it was the
absolutely,
miles? Yeah, okay, cool, cool, cool.
absolutely. And
Uh,
I didn't sleep an awful lot in the first few nights of
mm,
the race. So when, like in my previous couple of 200 milers, I'd run those races and I'd slept less than 40 minutes in all three of the 200 milers that I did last year.
mhm,
So I kind of went in with that strategy of, like 10 to between 5 and 10 minute naps, and I was going to see how long that would go. Um, and it was fine for the first two nights. Overall, I was not feeling too bad. It was probably the third night where things
mm,
started to get a little more difficult to concentrate, particularly between the hours of probably 2 a.m. and sunrise.
mhm.
But that fourth night, things just kind of fell apart a little bit from that perspective. I managed to keep moving pretty well, because speaking to some of the people who were behind me, I know that people knew that I was like 10 miles up the road, so they were trying to catch up. But I wasn't very coherent. So it was something that I wanted to I definitely tried a different strategy going into Cocodona, which I thought worked a lot better.
Very cool. Very cool. We'll get into that and like what you kind of changed it, but when you did realize like things you were seeing things and kind of not doing very well, did you try to sleep a little more during that or did you just keep going?
Yeah, so I had one like dirt nap that was maybe like 20 minutes, and then I was only like 5 kilometers or like 3 miles out from the aid station at that point, but I just like couldn't concentrate at that point, and I was just kind of like not moving very quickly. So I tried that, and then I probably had about 45 minutes at the next aid station as well, at that second last aid station, just to kind of get me through to sunrise.
Very cool. Very cool. And then obviously you did amazing. You kept going. What do you think, aside from sleep, because you kind of mentioned sleep was like a big thing that you learned a lot about and adjusted for Cocodona, but what do you think after the completion of the 300 was your biggest takeaway other than the sleep?
Well, the other big takeaway was, so when I finished the 300 miler, I didn't have any crew for Cocodona, and I was really lucky that I had a few people offer to help me a little bit closer to Cocodona. But probably the biggest thing I took away from it was that I really needed to be more prepared for aid stations and kind of have a bit more of a think about what kind of stuff I need to do, and actually just practice doing that. Like things like just putting your reservoir into your pack efficiently, things like that can save, like, if because you've got so much gear chucked in the back of the pack, so trying to then force a reservoir into it at the Monster was difficult at times. So I did a lot of practice, for the few days before Cocodona. Even though I knew that at that point that I had crew, I took a couple of hours and I practiced filling up my water bottles and then putting them into my pack quickly, and having to take out some of the other gear that I knew I'd have to take out at aid stations and use, and doing a few things like that, which really helped save a lot of time in aid stations when I was at Cocodona.
Very cool, very cool. And you kind of briefly talked about this, but I'm assuming you said your mom was out there to help you kind of for the Monster, but did you pretty much do this all by yourself?
So mum was out there, and there was only 7 aid stations where crew could come to during the Monster, and also mum was a bit worried about driving up Mount Lemon at night, because it was snowing, and she was a bit worried about ice on the road. So mum, we decided that it was probably best if she didn't come up to Mount Lemon. I didn't want her to kind of be stressed about coming up there. So, but there are some really long stretches where you don't see your crew. So I think you see them at an aid station called Gabe Zimmerman, which is maybe like 80 miles from the end of the race. And then you don't see them again until like 16 miles left. So there's like a couple of periods where it's like 60 miles or nearly 60 miles where you don't see your crew at all. So in those stretches, particularly towards the end of the race, where I was struggling with like the sleep deprivation and just, I guess, the fatigue of running and all the different things that are going on. That was something that I found really difficult.
Yeah. And so after Gabe, it was like a 64-mile stretch, and then you had one last aid station, then it was a 16-mile to the finish. So, and I know my runner experienced it as well, and everyone that I saw come through that last aid station was struggling after giant gap. There was a huge gap between the two aid stations before the actual finish. So don't feel bad. You're not the only one that, did struggle with that section. It was very, very well known that that was just a brutal, brutal section, but an amazing job for the first 300. And, what a amazing thing to kind of go into. And then how did the transition from I just ran this 300-mile race to I'm going to now go run Cocodona? What was your training like? And really, where were you mentally? Were you mentally ready? How'd that go for you?
I was just so after the race, I was just like it took a week or so just to kind of feel normal again. So I was just sleeping whenever I felt tired. I would just go and sleep. I guess that one of the advantages of being away from home was, I didn't have to go straight back to work. So it was kind of nice to be able to just, if I needed to sleep 10 hours at night, I could just sleep. And so I was doing some little hikes for the first week or so. And then I probably had 2 weeks, the 2 weeks leading up to Cocodona, I probably ran/hiked about 50 miles during the week. But, the conversations that I had with my coach before the race is that there's probably not a lot to be gained out of doing any kind of super hard training in between those two races. So the main focus was just trying to get things like moving again, get into the gym, not lifting heavy, but just trying to get all the muscles activated again. And I did do a couple of interval sessions in between the Monster and Cocodona, but more or less my main focus was just going out and spending as much time as I could on the Cocodona course. And there were some bits that from listening to other people that I'd heard it might be a little bit difficult. So I was lucky enough to go out and hike Eldon a couple of times and go and run up Mingus and spend a little bit of time in the Dells as you leave Prescott. And it was also great to meet. I'd put something up on the Cocodona page, and there was lots of runners that kind of put their hand up and said, look, I'm going out on a training run this day. So I got the opportunity to go and run with some people, and it was really good to meet all these like local runners. So that was amazing. And I got to ask them a little bit about, what are their main bits of advice, or what are they kind of focusing on it during the race. And so I think that experience from being out on the course was probably the most valuable thing that I took away from that period in between the two races.
Yeah, that's awesome. And like you mentioned, there's really not too much you can do in between each race. So it's doing what you can with the time given, resting the body, making sure everything's kind of back to normal, and then going back after the 200. So, and very cool that you stayed and got to get some course recon. I'm sure that was very insightful for you. Just to, be on the actual course, know what to expect when it came to race day, and kind of get your feet wet with the course. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. So we get to Cocodona. It's the day of the race. What is the feelings like on the start line for this race, knowing that you've just done the Monster a month ago?
I was just blown away by all the people, like the runners, everyone that was there. It was just incredible to like be standing, at the start line with all these amazing runners. I was just like blown away. So, and like as you run down that like starting shoot or race at the beginning of the Cocodona, there's so many crew, there's so many people cheering. Like I nearly started to get tears in my eyes running down that. It was just like the atmosphere was amazing.
Yes, yeah. I was there last year, and I completely understand. I was crewing, so it was just standing there. I was like, this is insane. Like all of these elite runners are right there. I'm, right here with all of these crew people, and everyone's cheering. Like it is the craziest thing to know. Like we are so niche, and there's, this quote unquote small group of people out here, but yet there's so many of us at this one race. And it's super, super cool. So, how did this race start out for you? You mentioned you had a little bit of support, you had a bit more of a crew, and you were kind of dialed in with faster transitions for aid stations. So how this race kind of start out for you, and how to go.
So the first section went really well. I was like, my biggest focus for Cocodona was to try and get those aid stations, and particularly the ones where I didn't have crew, like to really nail those and try and get them like done quickly. And so the way that I kind of run my watch in these is I turn like an auto lap that, instead of it being kilometers, I can kind of just see the section and my average pace for the section that I'm in. And I'll press lap every time I get to the aid station so I can see how long I took. And I was kind of thinking about it as I got to Crown King, and at that point I'd spent less than 14 minutes in like aid stations and those couple of water stops across 4. So, to give you an idea, like at the Arizona Monster, my second and third aid station stop was like 28 minutes, and then the one after that was like 44 minutes or something like that to get my gear sorted. So for me, I was pretty happy with that. When we got to Crown King, though, the truck that had all the drop bags in it had broken down, so I'd left all my mandatory gear in that. So, I mean, I know there was runners that like were in that front pack that kind of got there and then decided, they just try and risk it and try and get to a little bit further in the course. And I almost did that. And I had so some crew there, Christine and Donna were there, like looking after me at that one, and so I'd literally decided, okay, look, it might be half an hour, let's go, and they'd said, look, when the drop bag comes, we've been told we're allowed to come up to Camp Kipper and drop it to you, and I got like 400 meters out of the aid station, and they called me and said it's here, so I ran back and they kind of like helped me get everything out of the drop bag. It probably ended up costing me maybe half an hour overall, but I was like so glad that I knew that I had all my warm gear with me, particularly heading up into the mountains overnight.
Oh yeah, that's so important. And yes, I do. I watched the live stream, and everyone was like freaking out. I'm like, oh no, but it's glad I'm glad to know it wasn't too detrimental to your race, so that's awesome to hear. And then outside of that, you were kind of talking about aid station transitions with the auto lap. I love that. That's so smart. And I actually know a few people that have recently started doing that, and they're like, it's a game changer in my races, especially for the 200s, because you don't realize how quickly you can be stuck at an aid station. It take multiple minutes to just be sitting there chilling and all of that. So what were some other things that you've noticed for aid station transitions that kind of what you did to make them faster, and or like what you noticed and then changed between the two races?
Yeah, I think that like it was also being a little bit more purposeful with what I was doing in the aid station, like not having to, change my shoes and socks so often, and just like really think about, okay, when am I actually needing to do it? In all the 200 milers that I've had, I've never really had an issue with any blisters. I think the most I've had is like like 2 blisters for an entire like 200 miler. I think I got 2 blisters during the Monster, and that was mainly because coming down Mount Lemon, there was a creek that we had to cross over, and like there was no reason to get your feet wet, but somehow I managed to put both feet in the water.
Oh no.
I went to step on what I thought was like the shore, and it actually was just like some like sludge on the edge of the river, so my foot went completely into the water, and I was like, as soon as I did it, I was like, oh Aaron, you're such an idiot.
Yeah.
So like just changing things like that and just being a little more thoughtful about when I'm actually going to need to do things like change socks, how often I'm going to change shorts and shirts and all of those kind of things. And I guess coming from running backyard ultras where you come through every hour and you get a lot more opportunities to do these kind of things, I probably in those kind of races would change my clothes more often and things like that. But it's probably not that necessary in these kind of races, particularly if you're trying to, you know, get the, push through and do the best that you can. And so that probably helped a lot. It's just being a little bit more thoughtful around that as well.
Very cool, very cool. And it all makes sense. And at the end of the day, we can fine tune as much as we want, but I feel like, some of the stations you have to like actually sit and reset, and that could be changing your shoes, changing your clothes, and they're going to be a little longer for sure. But super, super cool to hear that such big improvement just from, literally a month apart. Those two races, you learned so much within that and kind of dialed that in and have done so much, so much good in it. So that's awesome. But let's go back to Cocodona. What, you know, first half went really well, aside from the drop back. What kind of happened middle towards end of race? How was that for you?
So I like it was the section from. So I left Crown King. From what I was told, I was in about 60th place at that point. And I don't remember overtaking too many people, but by the time I got to Whiskey Row, I was like in 30 something place. And I think a lot of that had like literally just been from pushing through the aid stations quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And then, being up in the mountains, like that first part of the race, even like the part running into Crown King, there was just some amazing views. And then you kind of continue along some of these roads, and there was just like, there was some it was some pretty epic views in this first part of the race. As we got into Whiskey Row, it was like it had already well and truly become dark. So I was really glad that I'd got to run through like that Watson Lake area outside of Prescott before I did that race, because that area is like absolutely stunning. So I'm really glad that I got to see that. Then, going from like we got to Iron King, and then going from like Iron King through Fane Ranch and like up to that climb at Mingus, like the level of mud was just epic. Like it was
Mm-hmm.
almost impossible to run. It was the kind of mud that kind of sticks to your feet. So like your entire shoe, instead of weighing like 300 grams or something, it was like each shoe was like a kilogram or like two pounds or something. So, and it was like, I mean, to begin with, like I think everyone was a little bit stressed because they couldn't run, and they thought this is an area where we should be able to run. But then you could see the person. Well, when I was going through, I could see the person in front of me, and I could see the person behind me, and they're all kind of trudging through this mud as well. So we're kind of like, I had a pacer at the time. We were kind of laughing about the whole situation. So it kind of became this, like it was almost comical the way it was. And then they had the runners kind of start off from, I think it was like the Mingus Traverse, like the 82-mile race that they had. And so a few of the front of the pack were like running through it pretty quick, and it was just like it was like epic to watch, given how much difficulty we were having just walking through it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's crazy.
Um, yeah. So and then you climb up Mount Mingus. Like that climb is the climb up it is not overly steep. It's kind of it felt like a pretty, like on the way up it was pretty good, but then that downhill section after you go through the Mount Mingus aid station, it just seems to go on forever.
Mm-hmm.
And as we, the first bit was pretty steep, and then as we got into the second part of the descent, like the mud came back, and it was just like going downhill in this like mud that was sticking to your shoe. Yeah, it was like that was quite difficult until you got to, I think maybe like 4 miles out from Jerome. Then you come out into this nice like gravel road, and it was a bit easier to run again. But for a while there, it was just like slow going.
Oh,
And I guess one of the highlights from that section for me was, so Jamil was doing the Mingus Traverse, so he kind of like caught up to us during that little bit, and then well, I just expected him to kind of keep running on past, but he's kind of stopped for a little bit and walked with us for a couple of 100 meters and had a bit of a chat. So that was like really cool to get to chat to him about how everything was going. And I kind of saw him a few times over the next couple of sections because he stopped for a couple of sleeps. So he'd kind of run past me and then he'd stop for a little nap, and then I kind of see him again on the trail. So that was kind of like a little highlight of that section on the night.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I did know he was out there doing stuff like that. So that's so cool. And what amazing, like, it sounds super silly, but it's little things like that that like make such a big difference in a race. And it's a highlight for you that you'll all forever remember, which is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool, very cool. So then what was going up and well, the section that you have no pacer and then going up Eldon, how was the ending of this race? I've heard so many different stories. So let's hear like how that went for you.
So that, like, once you get up onto the Coconino Plateau, you've got like a big chunk that's like most of it's pretty runnable. I think if you had fresh legs, the whole lot would be like quite easily runnable. Uh, I At that point I was trying to run, but I think it was just after all that climbing that we'd kind of done in the first half of the race, the legs were feeling and going through that mud as well. The legs were feeling pretty heavy, so I found it pretty difficult to keep a good pace. But I was still feeling pretty upbeat about everything, so just trying to run as much as I could. There was like a few like people out on course that we kind of saw. There was like some guys that I saw that I guess they were part of like they were doing some logging or something like that. So they were out there on course and they were like had all their machinery and they were on the side of their trucks and they were kind of cheering everyone on. So that was kind of cool. And then like the climb up Eldon was just like a long climb. It was definitely too steep at that point in the race to even consider running it. But it was kind of nice at that point. I had Pat, he was pacing me, and so we just kind of like we're trying to walk as quick as we could. We kind of knew that there were a few people that would probably be pretty close behind us. And as we got to nearly to the top of Eldon, we kind of could see that there was a couple of runners that were maybe like halfway up the climb. So we knew at that point we probably shouldn't dawdle around too much. And like the way down that descent is just on tired legs. It was pretty rough on the legs. Like mostly I was just jamming the poles down as hard as I could and trying to use them to lower myself down off some of the bigger rocks. But I think I moved pretty well down it, and it was kind of cool as well. So as we're about to start the descent, Jeff Browning, he was like up on his training run for the day, and I'd been out I'd met Jeff a couple of times already, so he was up there and he was like cheering us on, and so that was great. And then we got halfway down the descent, and then Jim Walmsley rocked up, and he's like there, he's cheering us on, and I couldn't believe how fast he was moving up the climb, like at least 5 times faster than I was moving down. And so like seeing these guys out there, I was like, oh, I can't slow down now. And I think I said that to Pat at one point. I'm like, we gotta speed up with all these people coming out. Like, and then as we got to the bottom of the climb, we kind of, I knew we had like maybe just over an hour, and I was like 6 miles from the end, and it was like, we just hit 79 hours. And so I said, look, I reckon we can make 80 hours here. And as we got into the last aid station, we kind of knew that I needed to do like sub 9-minute miles to get in there in time. And then so that first little bit after you leave that aid station, there's a little bit of like there's a few little hills and you're on trail before you get onto the road, and then it's pretty much downhill to the finish line.
Mhm.
So that took a little bit more time, but once we got onto the road, um, there was like this massive group. They were out with Dan who won the race, and he kind of came along next to us. He was like running with me for a little bit, and he was like cheering, and everyone was cheering. And that was the point where I was like, okay, we just got to run fast now.
Yeah.
So I, my last couple of miles, I was just running as fast as I could. I think they were kind of all below 9 minutes. So, but I think that, I didn't quite make it to the 80 hours, but I was really happy with how that last kind of bit went. I don't think when I got to the finish line, my knees just went like wobbly and I just fell over as soon as I
Mhm.
came over the finish line. So I think I didn't really have anything left in the tank at that point.
Yeah, and you gave it all you got, which is amazing. And such an amazing ending to all of that. You get to literally run with and or see so many amazing people. Jeff Walmsley and Dan, who literally just ran it. That's so cool. And you went out strong, literally to the point that your knees couldn't keep up. So that's one heck of a way to finish, and such an amazing journey between two races. 550 miles total. Actually, a little more than that because I think both races were over what they were supposed to be, or like really close. But what do you think like was the biggest takeaway between this journey of doing two big races back to back? I know obviously not many people have finished that and done both of that. So like, what was your biggest takeaways between this, both races within a month?
Like, I think coming away from these races, I don't know if this is like a takeaway for me in terms of improving my running, but I've just been blown away by how many people have been following along this journey. It's yeah, it's been crazy just how many people have messaged and said they've been following, or that it's inspired them to start running. So I guess for me, my takeaway is just I absolutely love this experience. I although it's definitely challenging doing these kind of events, but I've enjoyed the process of not just the doing the super long race, but the the kind of the process of becoming the kind of person that can take on something like this and get it done. When I think back to how I was, maybe like 6 years or 7 years or however long ago it was that I was like experiencing all the mental health problems and you know depression and anxiety, and where I'm at the moment, it's just to me, I'm really proud of the work that's gone in to become the person that I am today. And so I'm pretty excited to just continue along with this journey, and hopefully I can help other people find their journey. And it might not necessarily be into ultra running, but I know there are a lot of people that are probably in a situation similar to what I was in, and so that's I'd like to spend a lot more time using what I've learned, and you know, and hopefully to help other people.
Yes, I love that. And that's such an amazing takeaway, especially because I'm right there with you. As much as I love this core or like this experience of running, it's also like what I can see within others and do for others. Encouraging people and inspiring people is such a rewarding thing. Selfishly, I hate to say that, but it's just so amazing knowing like you, this little old you who really is just out here doing something you love, which is running, actually does encourage and inspire other people and helps them more than you probably ever do know, which is so so cool. But you'd kind of mentioned a little bit like about what is next. So what is next for you? You've literally just accomplished this amazing 300 and 250-mile race. Do you have anything like far reach goals that you're out there going for that you would like to talk about?
So there's actually I did sit down with my coach the other day. There's a few logistic things to do to like work out before I can like before all of this will become a reality. But so because I'm like the logistics will be around my study. So I'm currently doing an apprenticeship at the moment in carpentry, and so I've been struggling to get in to do the study aspect of it. Um, so I'm in at TAFE, which is like where I go to study in a
Hmm.
week. So hopefully I can sort out my schedule for the rest of the year. Hopefully, so like in the short term, I've got a couple of like more fun things that I'm doing. Like I'm going on that long ride
Hmm.
with my friend John next weekend. I'm and doing some like a hike the week after, and then my girlfriend Emma is doing a her first like ultra or first point to point ultra in
Very
like
cool.
3.5 weeks time. It's like a 50 miler along the coast in kind of southwest Western Australia. So I think I'm going to go and sign up, and I'm going to go and run that with her.
Very
So
cool.
that will be really fun. Like in terms of bigger goals, there's two trails. So one in Western Australia called the Bibbulmun Track,
Okay.
which is 1,000 kilometre trail. Um, so I'm hoping in October to have a go at the FKT for that. Uh,
Very cool.
and then next year in May, so I have a friend who from South Australia, Johan, who he's like he's actually the reason why I signed up for Cocodona in the first place. He was pacing me on 200 mile that I did last year, and we were talking about Cocodona, and we were both going to sign up and run it together, but he just because of his schedule couldn't do it this year.
Mhm.
Um, but we're going to next year run or attempt the FKT of a trail in South Australia called the Hyson Trail. So that's like a 1,200 kilometre trail that runs from kind of central South Australia down towards Adelaide along in and the coast, and so they're probably my next two like really big things that I want to kind of set my sights on and see how I go. I guess with doing these longer races, particularly the monster, uh, I know in order to kind of do those, I'm gonna have to like look at um how I sleep in these kind of things. And I did get a good chance to chat with Jeff about how he's done it when he did his Colorado FKT.
Mhm.
So that's probably something for me to kind of work on and maybe test it at if like I've got to work out how I'm going to test it in the meantime. So there might be a couple of like multi-day things that I do in the short term just to kind of see if I can get that locked down a little better.
Yeah, and I hate to kind of backtrack, but bringing up sleep, how did you change your sleep up from the 300 to the Cocodona?
So when I did so in the monster, like my first kind of three scheduled sleep stops, I'd scheduled to sleep for 8 minutes. And
Mhm.
so at Cocodona, my first proper sleep was at Iron King. I didn't sleep particularly well when I was at aid stations, but I definitely felt a lot more rested in the back half of the race. So I slept for about 20 minutes in my first one. And then when I got to Sedona, which is like just before sunrise on the second night, I had like more like a 45, maybe closer to 60 minute sleep, which is um, and then I had one that was maybe 15 or 20 on the third night and a few like dirt naps. So when I felt really tired on the trail, I would just immediately, and my pace was dropping off, I just immediately, the first time I said to my pacer, I'm like, I think I just need to sleep for 5 minutes. Can you just chuck the timer on? And it was amazing when I just did that a little more regularly, how much my pace improved so that, if you're taking 5 minutes sleep and then you're running 2 minutes quicker a mile after the sleep, it takes a couple of miles to make up that time again. Um, and so that's probably something that I realized is that although you're taking the time to sleep, you make it up really quickly if you're moving a lot quicker. So, uh, that was how I kind of changed I guess I didn't sleep an awful lot more, but my
Mhm.
attitude towards sleep shifted a lot, and I kind of looked at it as a positive as opposed to like a waste of time.
Mhm. Mhm. No, that's so smart, and it makes sense. And I feel like sleep is one thing that everyone always asks, like, "Well, what's your sleep schedule? What'd you do?" But I've heard so many different things. I'm sure you have as well, and a lot of time it really depends on the person too. And then also like kind of seeing what really works for you within a race, because the 200-mile compared to 250 compared to 300 miles, whole different ball game. So super cool. I love that you're dialing in, especially for the longer efforts that you're about to and go after and all that. So super super amazing. One question I have, and then I will let you go. So thank you so much for being on the pod and sharing all this amazing knowledge. But this is a question I ask everyone that I have on the podcast as long as I can remember. And that is, this is called the Tribe of Runners. I love the community. We've talked about it briefly, and it's just such an amazing aspect in the sport, and it's what's drawn me to ultra running. So with that being said, what does the word tribe mean to you within the running world?
Well, it's funny. To me, it's like finding your people, like the people that you kind of, you feel comfortable around, the people where you can be yourself around. Like that's what I kind of would, if I was to think about tribe, that's kind of how I would view it, and particularly in the running world. Most of my best friends that I have now are people that I've met through some kind of endurance endeavor, but mostly through running, and they're the
Mhm.
kind of people that I love hanging out with and love spending time out on the trails with.
I love it. That's so cool. And you probably have a whole different sort of tribe because you also were in biking and all that. And that's a whole nother endeavor. I'm sure it's very, very similar, but at the same time, we're all endurance people that love to just get out there and see what we can do, not only physically, but mentally. So that's super cool. And I actually do have one last question. And
Yeah.
I don't mean this in a mean way or a rude way, but honest opinion, which race did you like better, the Monster or the Cocodona?
Look, the one that I know that I definitely straight away want to come back to is Cocodona.
Mm,
Um, I I I really I really liked the Arizona Monster as well. So it's hard to kind of like if I had to say Cocodona was my favorite race out of those two,
mhm,
but the Arizona Monster was like a pretty incredible experience, and I'm grateful that I got to do the two races together, in particular because it kind of gave me like Arizona's this like beautiful place, and it's I found it incredible that you can move, like you can drive like less it's like less than 2 hours from Phoenix to Flagstaff, and then you go from like being in like 100 degrees and like the middle of the desert to being up in the Alpine and it's like snowing and stuff.
mm. Yeah.
It like from that perspective, being able to see the extent of Arizona and how different it is and how much it changes, and that was like a pretty special experience. So to be a part of both of them was like I definitely wouldn't like I it would be hard to choose because they offer something quite different, and
Mm.
both of them have given me something amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I have crewed both of them, and both of them are amazing races. The Monster is it's just long, and the course is very similar. I'm sure there is different aspects, but like you mentioned with Cocodona, you see so much. It's like you literally every so often, it's like you get into a new world, a new atmosphere, and I think that's why so many people are drawn to that race. Is it's just a beautiful, beautiful course. So, super
Hmm.
cool. Thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing this story. It's been amazing.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, Liz.
Yeah, of course.